Hello, young professionals. My name is Marissa Gaston. I'm the director of the YP program here at the Washington Policy Center. Thank you so much for joining us for our July podcast. I'm going to be your host for the duration of this episode, and I'm actually doing something different. I'm flying solo today, and I'm going to shake up our format a little bit and share with you three updates from three different centers within the Washington Policy Center. We're going to be touching on Eastern Washington, on our Environment Center, and on our Center for Education. And at the end of the episode, I'm going to give you some info about our upcoming YP Summer Social Series next month, August. Stay tuned for that. You do not want to miss these. But first, we're going to get into those three updates with some of our latest research. So our first piece comes from Chris Cargill. It was published on July 26th and is titled, "Yakima Considers Ban on Local Income Tax." Yakima City Council members have the opportunity on August 2nd to bring a popular and important taxpayer protection policy to the Valley. The council will debate placing a city charter amendment on the ballot that would ban a local income tax. If approved, Yakima would become the fifth city in the state to adopt the ban. So far, the cities of Spokane, Spokane Valley, Granger, and Battleground have adopted local income tax bans. In Spokane's case, it was via a charter amendment, which is what Yakima voters could consider after the council's action. The ban in Spokane passed with more than 70% support in every precinct of the city. A poll shows 72% of Washingtonians support a ban on a local income tax. Local income tax bans are important. In 1984, the legislature overwhelmingly passed a law making it explicitly clear that local governments in Washington state do not have the authority to impose an income tax. For decades, this law remained in effect without question or controversy until elected officials in the city of Seattle attempted to impose an income tax in 2017. Subsequent court rulings challenging this action reaffirmed the longstanding constitutional prohibition on a graduated income tax. The State Court of Appeals, however, in July 2019 issued a shocking ruling that the statewide ban on local income taxes, which has been in force for 36 years, is unconstitutional and violates single subject restrictions. The state Supreme Court then refused to hear the case on appeal. The High Court's refusal left the appeals court ruling in place, seemingly opening the door to the enactment of flat local income taxes. The lack of a state or local tax on income has long been advertised by the State Department of Commerce as being a, quote, competitive advantage, close quote, for Washington. Washington voters have already rejected income tax proposals 10 straight times. By letting voters decide to ban a local income tax, Yakima City officials would be honoring the clear message and would be respecting the popular local income tax ban as it had existed since 1984. That concludes our update from Chris Cargill. If you would like to know more about the Washington Policy Center's work against the recently passed, in our most recent legislative session, capital gains income tax, please head on over to our website, washingtonpolicy.org, and explore the work of Jason Mercier, who is our Center for Government Reform Director. He has been so active, has a ton of material on this issue, and please, I encourage you to explore that. Next, we're going to move over to the Center for the Environment. This blog was written by Todd Myers and published on July 27th. It is titled, "Issaquah's EV charging requirement will do nothing to reduce CO2 emissions." Recently, the Issaquah City Council adopted a requirement to require the installation of a large number of electric vehicle, or EV, charging stations around the city in an effort to reduce CO2 emissions. This mandate is likely to be extremely expensive, but will do virtually nothing, or nothing at all, to reduce CO2 emissions. The rules will fail because the requirement is duplicative of existing state laws, costing local businesses and residents more to do what is already being done, and because current EV charging data shows charging stations are rarely used and are likely to become less important in the future. There are several strategies the city can use to reduce CO2 emissions. Council members should prioritize those efforts that are most effective, working within state laws rather than requiring businesses and citizens to spend money for no climate benefit. Current EV usage in Issaquah. Data about existing public EV charging stations in Issaquah demonstrate that they are rarely used and that where there are multiple chargers, the additional stations are rarely used. Using data from ChargePoint about available charging stations on a 15-minute basis, we collected data over the course of 2 months regarding the use of existing EV stations. The only stations that are consistently used are those associated with places where people live, like the Z homes in the Issaquah Highlands, or places of work, like the Issaquah School District offices. Usage there is still intermittent. The Z homes have 2 charging stations, and while one is used almost all the time, the second is used only about 25% of the time. The school district has 2 charging stations, and they are used only about 15% of the time. Other stations are used far less. The charger at the Issaquah Highlands Safeway is used about 5% of the time. Another location 1 block from Front Street in downtown Issaquah is used about 1% of the time. Even the chargers at the Issaquah Park and Ride are used infrequently, with the most used station averaging under 15% and the least used at about 1%. Existing use data shows stations are used extremely infrequently, especially at retail locations where people stay for a short period of time. Future charging demand. The assumption behind the requirement to increase the number of charging stations is that the growing number of EVs will require more opportunities to charge vehicles. This may not be accurate. The availability of EV stations is designed to reduce, quote, range anxiety, close quote, where EV drivers don't know if they have enough power to drive to their destination and back. Trips to the store and other retail locations are not the kind of trips that create range anxiety. Most EVs are charged at home and have more than adequate range to make these trips. For example, the Nissan Leaf has a standard range of almost 150 miles, and the Leaf Plus can travel up to 226 miles on a charge. A round trip from the Issaquah Highlands to the Cougar Mountain Zoo and back is about 16 miles. This is about the longest trip one can take within Issaquah. A trip from Bellevue to Gilman Village would amount to less than 30 miles round trip. Even an EV with a quarter charge could make this trip. Further, batteries will improve in the future, reducing the need for a large number of EV stations. Tesla's low-end Model 3 already boasts a range of 353 miles on a charge. Even as the number of EVs increase, the need to recharge on short trips or trips in addition to regular commutes will decline. It is clear that the city has not considered the impact of these various factors. Rather than reflecting estimates based on projected need, the targets in the ordinance are all divisible by 10. The requirements are essentially just guesses based on what feels right rather than an actual calculation. Additionally, installing EV charging stations is a particularly expensive and regressive way to cut CO2 emissions. Data from Washington State and California show that the vast majority of EV drivers are still wealthy. EV subsidies, either direct or in the form of building charging stations for wealthy drivers, do little to increase overall sales because buyers aren't price sensitive and have access to home charging stations or other sources of charging. Issaquah's efforts will not reduce CO2 emissions. Finally, local actions are extremely ineffective when addressing CO2 emissions. This year, Washington State adopted a statewide policy to reduce emissions to zero by 2050. With that policy in place, local actions add nothing to total statewide emissions reductions because emissions reductions are already mandated and would occur with or without any action by Issaquah. As a result, the costs associated with Issaquah's CO2 requirements are pure waste, adding nothing to total emissions reductions, but reducing the amount of funding available for other important environmental issues. For example, imagine Issaquah offered to pay Pfizer an additional $200 for every COVID vaccine administered in the city. The vaccines are already available to Issaquah residents and are already paid for by the federal government. The additional expense wouldn't help increase the vaccination rate, but would waste taxpayer dollars. The same is true with Issaquah's efforts to reduce CO2 emissions. They are simply duplicative and wasteful. There are many environmental issues that Issaquah could address, from PFAS pollution in the water to the impact of runoff on Lake Sammamish salmon and kokanee. Regulations or city spending on reducing CO2 emissions are wasteful and reduce resources that could be used to address these other real environmental problems. Climate change is a global problem and is best addressed at higher levels of government. Local government should focus on local environmental problems rather than wastefully duplicating state and federal programs. That concludes our update from the Center for the Environment. Thank you to Todd Myers. And finally, we're going to hear the latest from Liv Finna, who is the director for our Center for Education. Her most recent blog, published on July 27th, is titled, "More School Districts Refuse to Teach a Person's Race. To teach a person's race determines if they are guilty or innocent, more or less capable." Parents across Washington state are worried teachers will soon teach their children critical race theory, or CRT. Parents know CRT is incorrect and hateful, and they are worried teachers will be teaching CRT ideas as truth and established fact. Parents are raising these concerns to their school boards because in April, the legislature passed SB 5044, mandating that public school staff receive training in CRT. Onlookers in the media dismiss parent concerns, saying SB 5044 does not require training of CRT content because CRT is not explicitly mentioned in the bill. These onlookers are naive and misinformed. The words that are in the bill, quote, cultural competency, diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism, close quote, are all understood to mean critical race theory as applied to public education. Fortunately, a number of districts are taking steps to protect their staff and students from its harmful content. Last month, the Chehalis School District, a small district south of Olympia of 8 schools and 3,000 students, heard the fears of parents and took a principled stand. On June 15th, 2021, the Chehalis School Board passed a resolution saying, quote, We will not teach Chehalis students that people, due to their race or background, are inherently good or bad, guilty or innocent, more or less capable than others, close quote. This resolution also stated, quote, the central purpose and goal of the Chehalis School District is to build a sound educational foundation for each student, enabling them to become responsible citizens, close quote. Last week, on July 23rd, all 5 school board directors of the Peninsula School District voted to pass a similar resolution. The Peninsula School District is located in Gig Harbor, east of Tacoma, and it educates about 8,700 students at 20 schools. Peninsula's resolution says, quote, all students, teachers, and support staff are equal as individuals, and no one race, gender, ethnicity, or religion is superior or inferior as it relates to another. And no student, teacher, or support staff member should be taught that they are an oppressor or victim based on their race, close quote. Peninsula also restated its mission to educate children and to, quote, continue to teach a complete and accurate history that is inclusive and without bias, close quote. Moses Lake School District has also joined this effort. This district, located east of the Cascade Mountains, educates 8,300 students at 19 schools. Moses Lake is still deciding the final language of its resolution, but some language has already been made public. Moses Lake's resolution asserts the district is not a political organization and does not teach students, quote, how to think. Students in Moses Lake will not be taught, quote, people due to race, background, or social class are inherently good or bad, guilty or innocent, more or less capable than others, close quote. This is strong and clear language. These school district resolutions are hopeful signs. Washingtonians do not believe schools should divide children and staff from one another on the basis of race. The leaders of Chehalis, Peninsula, and Moses Lake should be commended for protecting their students and staff from critical race theory and for keeping their focus on providing their students the skills and knowledge they will need to succeed in life. That concludes our final update from the Education Center Director. Thank you for tuning in and listening to these. Now I'm going to share with you some upcoming news from the young professionals. We are gearing up for our series of YP Summer Socials next month in August. We'll be kicking it off with our first one on Thursday, August 5th at 6 p.m. in Tri-Cities, where we'll be hearing from Connor Boyack, who is the founder and president of the Libertas Institute in Utah, which is a fellow SPN think tank alongside the Washington Policy Center. And Connor Boyack is also the creator of the Tuttle Twins books, which are a series of children's books fighting against socialism and sharing with children values about civic duty, good citizenship, entrepreneurship, and more classical ideals of liberty. Our Education Center Director, Lee Finna, from whom you just heard, will also be speaking at the Tri-Cities event on August 5th. On Wednesday, August 11th, we will have our Spokane Summer Social. We'll be hearing from 2 fabulous speakers, Darren Duane and Cindy Wendell, about their entrepreneurial stories and just their inspirational paths forward in their careers, and from Jason Mercier, our Center for Government Reform Director. And that social will be held at the beautiful Arborcrest Wine Cellars in Spokane, Washington. It's just an absolutely stunning venue. So I highly encourage all of you to check this out and spread the word about it. And finally, our last social of the series will be on Thursday, August 19th, our Seattle Summer Social. Our venue is to be confirmed, but it will most likely be on the waterfront in downtown Seattle. And we'll be hearing from Ryan Neal, a longtime friend of WPC, a businessman, investor, and truly inspiring entrepreneur, as well as Mark Harmsworth, our Small Business Center Director, and Todd Myers, from whom you heard regarding charging stations in Issaquah, our Environmental Center Director. So these will be just such fun events for you to come, enjoy food, drinks, networking, socializing with other young professionals, getting back out into the swing of things in person. Finally, we cannot wait to see you all there. All of these events are free to our members and $15 for non-members. Highly encourage you to check these out. If you can't come, spread the word at least to your friends, and let's get everybody out again and seeing each other and make these just some huge events of the summer. So I, for one, cannot wait to see you all there. And finally, once we conclude our summer social series, that's a bit of a tongue twister, our next and biggest event of the year will be our YP annual dinner. Registration for this is now open. Our keynote speaker is John Mackey, Whole Foods CEO and advocate for capitalism. This will be on October 1st at the Hyatt Regency in Bellevue. This is, as I said, our biggest event of the entire year. YP has its own ballroom. It's a ton of fun. We have a dinner, we have a reception, networking, we hear from some amazing speakers, and then we just dance. So please check out registration for this event. Tickets are discounted for members. Do not miss this event. You will not want to miss the annual dinner. And I cannot wait to see you all there. So with that, I want to thank you again for tuning into our July podcast. Let me know what you think of this new format. Is this useful to you to just hear some of WPC's latest content shared? Let me know what you think. As always, I'm a resource for you. My name, again, is Marissa Gaston. I'm the director of the Young Professionals program here at the wonderful Washington Policy Center, and I will see you at the socials next month. Thank you.